Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Shanae Lee Show. This is a video I've been wanting to do for a while now because historical fiction is one of my favorite genres, if not my favorite genre. It's a really close tie between historical fiction and fantasy, but fantasy I feel has a lot of supporters. I don't mean this in a bad way, but fantasy has a lot of supporters behind it, so I feel like it's not really something that I need to promote and advocate for a lack of a better term or phrase. Whereas historical fiction I feel like gets a little bit of a bad rap because a lot of people associate it with World War II historical fiction, which there is a lot of, and two of my recommendations, 2.5, 3 of my recommendations are sort of World War II recommendations, but that's not the only thing that the genre includes, which is why I wanted to do this video as a starter pack that included other time periods within history that have been focused on in historical fiction books. This is not the end all be all of the historical fiction recommendations list that I could do. I really wanted to start off with a starter pack because these books are the books that would make it easiest to start getting into the genre. It's a starter pack. I'm calling this a starter pack for a reason, for the people who want to get into historical fiction but don't know exactly where to start. There are 2 books on this list that I do not have physical copies of, but I will still be naming them and showing a picture of the book cover when I get around to doing it. So with that said, let's get into my historical fiction starter pack. 12 books I would recommend for getting into the genre. These first 3 recommendations are 2 manga and a graphic novel, because sometimes manga graphic novels are an easy way to get into a genre that also help give visuals for the book, for that specific book. To start off, I am recommending Inuyasha, and I am recommending the whole manga series, but this basically follows a young girl, Kokome, who's high school age, junior high school age by the American school standards, and she lives at a shrine, and one day she falls into the family shrine's well and gets and she ends up traveling to feudal Japan where she meets Inuyasha, and then they have to go on this journey together to bring back all of the shards of the Shikon Jewel, the Shikon no Tama, or the Sacred Jewel. Next up is the sequel to Inuyasha, Yashahime, and again I am recommending the whole manga series. And all I'll say about this, because saying too much will be a little bit spoilery, is that it follows the second generation, the children of the Inuyasha characters. The next one I'm going to recommend is the graphic novel, and that is The Remarried Empress by Alpha Tart and Sumpul, with art by Sumpul. I don't think this is necessarily classified as historical fiction, but considering a lot of its storyline and considering its setting, it feels very much like a historical fiction, which is why I'm including this in the starter pack, because of just the overall feel. In The Remarried Empress, we're following the Empress, Navier, whose husband, the Emperor, has just requested for a divorce, and she agrees under the condition that she is allowed to remarry. Throughout the next couple of volumes, we're following her story and the build-up to the Emperor asking for a divorce. But it's not a surprise that he does, because the divorce happened within this volume. My next recommendation is The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner. This was her debut novel, and I would also recommend The London Seance Society, but the reason why I chose to include The Lost Apothecary in this over The London Seance Society, and that's because it really includes a lot of other subgenres that are very popular. There's a little bit of a murder mystery going on, a couple of murder mysteries, but over the course of a couple centuries. There's a little bit of romance, and it's also partly contemporary since it's a dual timeline. In the one timeline, you follow in 18th century London a character by the name of Nella, who runs an apothecary shop with an unusual clientele, because there are whispers throughout the women of London in the city that Nella deals with very lucrative, very secretive poisons that aren't necessarily going to be picked up by the available forensics of the day of 18th century London. And a lot of these women have gone to Nella already to try to take care of the aggressive men in their lives. And then in the modern timeline, we're following a wannabe historian and up-and-coming historian. I'm blanking on her name right now, but I did talk about this book in my March through April reading vlog, which is linked down below in the description. In the modern timeline, we're following the up-and-coming historian who is in the midst of a turmoil with her marriage because it's starting to fall apart, and she didn't do the life she wanted to do because her husband had told her, like, no, you don't need to do that. And so she's at London alone when she was supposed to be there with her husband, and she stumbles upon a clue about the apothecary murders that happened in 18th century London. So the Lost Apothecary does have a lot of really good subgenres that are pretty popular within the bookish social media circles, which is why I'm including it in this video. Next up is The Three Lives of Alex St. Pierre by Natasha Lester, and honestly I would recommend any and all Natasha Lester books as part of this starter pack, and I am recommending all Natasha Lester books as part of this starter pack, but I'm only going to be talking about 2 specific books by her in this video. The first one being The Three Lives of Alex St. Pierre. So in this book we are following Alex St. Pierre, who is the head of press for the up-and-coming yet-to-be-opened House of Dior. She's basically the one promoting it and putting it out in the newspapers and the media of the time when her past comes to haunt her, because in her past, during World War II, she was an informant, a spy in Switzerland against the Nazis and for the Allies. One of the figures from her past as a spy begins to haunt her modern day life, and that's all I'm gonna say. But this is such a fantastically told story, and again, it has a lot of subgenres that are really popular today, like romance, mystery, fashion. So I really feel like this is a great introductory read, along with Natasha Lester's other books, to historical fiction. Next up is the other book that I'm recommending by Natasha Lester, and that is The Disappearance of Astrid Bricard. And this one is one of the dual timeline books, and in it, it's kind of the same timeline as Alex St. Pierre. Part of the timeline for Astrid Bricard is lining up with Alex St. Pierre, and then you also have a modern time period. So Astrid Bricard is one of the fashion designers for Christian Dior and Dior House and Dior in general, and her grandmother Mise Bricard was the muse of Christian Dior. Astrid has to live up to that legacy when she disappears, and then Astrid's daughter Blythe, apparently I can't speak today, Astrid's daughter Blythe also has to hold up to the legends of not only Mise Bricard but her own mother Astrid. Blythe has to hold up to both of those legacies of being muses to very famous photographers or fashion designers, because Astrid was the muse of Hawk Jones, a photographer. And we're also dealing in covering maternal secrets and pasts and histories and uncovering why Astrid disappeared. Next up, I'm recommending The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. The Song of Achilles is a really good introductory book. A lot of people on bookish social media, when they were really hyping up The Song of Achilles, were saying how sad it is, how emotional. I do agree that it is a very emotional book, a very emotional retelling of the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus. However, I do not think it's as sad as a lot of people make it out to be, but that's just my opinion. But in this, if you need to know if you haven't read it, in this book you follow Achilles and Patroclus, with Achilles being one of the big names of the Iliad by Homer. You follow basically what is their love story, no matter what historians say. They were lovers, is the whole premise of this book. And then next up, I'm also recommending Circe by Madeline Miller, and honestly, I prefer this one over The Song of Achilles, and I think it's better than The Song of Achilles. And in this, you follow another name within the epics that Homer wrote, specifically the Odyssey, and the nymph, the witch Circe, the one who turned all of Odysseus's men to pigs. And you follow her story, where she came from, leading up to her meeting with Odysseus, and then after her meeting with Odysseus. And then next up, I'm recommending Almost There, one of the Disney Twisted Tales by Farah Rochon. And you may be asking, Shanna, that's a fantasy retelling book of a Disney movie. But I am including it because the setting of Princess and the Frog in this book is kind of 1920s-ish New Orleans, Louisiana. And then Almost There follows the plotline with Tiana and answers the question of what if Tiana had made a deal with Dr. Facilier that changed everything. And then next up, I'm recommending another Disney Twisted Tale, which is When You Wish Upon a Star by Elizabeth Lim. And again, it's the historical setting of it all, historical Italy. In this one, you're following the premise, answering the question of what if the Blue Fairy wasn't supposed to help Pinocchio? And honestly, I'm not the biggest Pinocchio fan, but this made me love Pinocchio. I don't love the movie. I don't love the Disney movie, I should say. I did like the, why am I blanking on his name? Why am I blanking on his name? I'm blanking. Jesus. Oh, Del Toro. There we go. I did like the Del Toro version, the Del Toro stop motion movie of Pinocchio. I did really like that one. Del Toro's movie and this book are the only Pinocchio related things that I do like, which made me really happy because I do really love Elizabeth Lim. And then next up, I have Bravely by Maggie Stiefvater. There is another Brave book coming out, specifically A Twisted Tale by Farah Rochon, which I'm hoping I'll like, and that might be included in the starter pack. Honestly, I won't know until April because it comes out in April. It's not out yet. But back to Bravely by Maggie Stiefvater. This follows Merida and her family, more specifically Merida, years later after the events of the movie. And in this, she's approached by two of the Celtic gods. Merida basically learns that her and her family have kind of become stagnant, which is not something you want over time. And Merida, over the course of a year, over the course of 4 seasons, has to prove that that's not the case with her family. And then last but not least is The Adventures of Indiana Jones, and this is a leatherback edition I got from Barnes & Noble, and it includes the screenplays adapted into book story format by 3 different authors, and specifically the books are Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and The Last Crusade. And you may be wondering, Shanna, why are you doing Indiana Jones? Because most of these are technically historical fiction. Those movies are technically historical fiction adventure because most of them are pre-2000 and even pre-1990, so historical fiction. And this is really good for the fans of Indiana Jones, George Lucas fans, and I honestly feel like the book is a good introduction to historical fiction because if you love the movies, then it's really good to be able to like read the books and get into the actual genre of historical fiction books. In the comments, let me know if there are any books that you would recommend for getting into the historical fiction genre, and also let me know if you would want to see an advanced recommendations video, meaning that books I would recommend if you want to read more historical fiction. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.